Hi, and welcome back to our Friday Night Project. The women in our lives, the women that influence us, change us, make us grow, make us beyond what we think we can be. Well, tonight's episode is about my Aunt Grace. Now, my Aunt Grace was really kind of like a grandmother to me. If you watched last week's episode about my grandma Stevens, when she was very young, too, she went to live with my grandma Comer because her parents had died with influenza. And Aunt Grace, Grandma Comer's daughter, and her grew up together. So they were like sisters. Well, those two sisters grew up and ended up marrying two brothers. So my Grandma Stevens married Oscar. He was the one that died in the war, World War II. And Aunt Grace married Uncle Willard. They both worked for the railroad when they were young. I remember a story of my Aunt Grace telling me that they were young when they were, you know, and he would get off of work, they would eat supper, and then they would go berry picking in the hills, in the Black Hills of South Dakota. And they would pick raspberries or strawberries or currants or chokecherries or whatever was ripe at that time. And then the next day when he went to work, she would process it. And I thought that was such a great teamwork. And I find that teamwork with me and my husband, and I really appreciate that. Now, sometimes the memories we have are just little snippets, and all those little snippets add up to a big thing. And I mean, there's always big memories, but those little snippets really are the things that make a difference. Christmas time. My Aunt Grace always gave me, my sister, my brothers, all the little nieces and nephews, anybody like that, socks. We got socks for Christmas. We probably complained. I'm sure we did. But I remember that out of the handful of things that I can remember that I got for gifts when I was growing up, socks. And that was kind of, she came from an era that when people were poor, this was very logical. And even today, I love getting socks. My girls will give me socks for Christmas because they know I love them. Influence. Now, a thing about my Aunt Grace is that she loved collecting salt and pepper shakers, the sets. And back then, there was just thousands upon thousands of different kinds you could get. So if somebody went on vacation, they went someplace, they would bring her back salt and pepper shakers. And she had amassed, through her lifetime, 900 different types, different sets of salt and pepper shakers. It was fabulous. You went into her house, and in her kitchen and in her living room, she had these curio cabinets, and they were just packed with salt and pepper shakers. I loved looking at them. You couldn't touch them, but I loved looking at them. Now, besides the socks, I should mention, at Christmas time, she would make anywhere around 70 dozen cookies to give away. My mom told me that she remembers going over there and helping. So one day it was making the dough. Everything went in the refrigerator. The next day, it was baking cookies all day long. Fabulous. Fabulous. And the women in my lives love making cookies. I love making cookies. They're so fun. And don't you remember when you were little? Don't you remember when you were bigger? You had that special kind of cookie that you loved, and it almost melted in your mouth. She was a fabulous woman. And my mom told me a story once about when Aunt Grace was younger. She would complain about Grandma Comer watching soap operas, their stories. But then my Aunt Grace had her stories. And you didn't call on the phone when she was watching them. You didn't stop by the house because she'd basically ignore you because her story was on. She probably watched those stories, I don't know, 40, 50 years, who knows? I don't know how long those soap operas have been running. That was just something that she loved to do. Now, in her house, in the basement, there was a little apartment, and there was an elderly woman that lived there, Helen. And I don't think she was related to us. But my whole time of growing up, she always lived there. My Aunt Grace had a beautiful backyard, and I love gardens. Huge trees, and she had those metal chairs that, how you can kind of lean back on them. I have two of them now because I love them so much. But we would have picnics and we would have stuff. But she was at every um, family gathering. Of course, she was there. And Uncle Willard was there until he passed away. And I have a couple things of Aunt Grace's. Now, one of them are these two little girls. My mom gave me these that she had gotten when Aunt Grace, I don't know, maybe she got them before Aunt Grace passed away, but she'd had them in her cabinets. And she told me the story of that Aunt Grace made these when my mom was really little, like a little girl. So these are easily 75 years old. They could be older than that. They could be 80 years old. But they're precious to me. I mean, they're nothing spectacular that somebody would just go, oh my gosh, But to me, they're fabulous. I've always loved the name Grace. But maybe because my Aunt Grace was always so kind to me. I don't know. But I've loved that name, and one of my daughters is named after her. And I find it a very romantic name. Well, my Aunt Grace, when she married my Uncle Willard, they bought a bedroom set. And it had the headboard and the footboard and a little chair and a little dresser that had the great big mirrors, the great big round circular mirrors, great big chest of drawers, and a little dresser. And one time, my mom had inherited that, and I asked, could I have that sometime? And my mom let me have it not very long after that, because I wanted to be able to pass that on generationally. And Aunt Grace had two daughters, but that wasn't something they wanted. And so I want to give it to my daughter Grace so that she can give it to her daughter Nisa. And I think that can just be a wonderful legacy. And I have some earrings from her and some other little things. I have a blue dish that was hers. But those things, every time you see them, remind you of those women in your lives. And it brings up stories, and it brings up smiles and laughter and tears and all the things that go along with life. Now, she made a really good cold rice salad. I don't know if it was a rice pudding. Not really. It was more like a salad. And I remember eating it all the time when we had picnics in her yard. That's a funny thing to remember. Funny like the grate in her floor that I thought I would fall through. Those are funny things to remember. A weird thing about my Aunt Grace. I was probably 40 years old before I ever found out that she had been married before my Uncle Willard. She had been divorced, and her two girls were not my Uncle Willard's. I never knew that. I don't remember ever seeing another man present. I don't know what the deal was. I never really asked. It didn't seem important to me. But I thought it was interesting that people just didn't say stuff about that. And, now it's not such a big deal, but back then it was. And I just found that she was this, in fact, all the women in my life so far that I've featured, my Grandma Reichert, my Grandma Stevens, and my Aunt Grace, they are all very strong women, powerful women, but they have this calming presence within themselves. And I hope I have that too. I hope that I have that resonance with my daughters and the people that I affect. But this weekend, I hope that you look at the women in your lives. If they're still alive, give them a phone call. Send them some flowers, send them a card, let them know that you're thinking about them, because they're important. Now, next week, I'm going to talk about my Aunt Marion. Now, my Aunt Marion is very special to me because she's also my godmother. She's still alive. I think this year she turns 94. And she is a force to be reckoned with. And so I hope you have a great weekend. As always, like, subscribe, share with the world, those things. And be prosperous, be blessed, and I will see you next Friday night. And of course, I do gardening together every Tuesday and Thursday morning. So have a great weekend.